relating to the Sefirot that we're dealing with during these weeks, during the period between Pesach and Shavuos. So this week we are dealing with the Sefira of Yesod. What's the Sefira of Yesod? So again, if you do the positioning of the person, so to the right is Chesed, to the left is Gvura, and the front is Tiferes. Up is Netzach, below is Hod, which you did in the last few weeks. To the back is Yesod. Yesod is foundation, and it also is translated as, it's a middle column, Sefira, and it's translated as something we'll call alignment. Alignment, which means Yesod is when a person's internally Yesod would be when a person's thoughts and his feelings and his expressions are all aligned with each other, and there's no inner dichotomy and inner separation. That's a person that has internally an attribute of Yesod. Yesod is also not only experienced within. So again, Yesod would be is the bottom part of the body, the middle, center part of the lower part of the body, which means that there's a full expression from the mind, from the heart, moach, lev, and kavod, from the mind, the heart, and the kavod, which is the liver. So you have that direct order of melech, like a master. So it's melech is moach, lev, kavod. It's an acronym for these three words, which is the three internal organs. These are the basic three internal organs. Now, of course, there are other organs, but these are the basic Kabbalistic internal organs, which is the upper part of the head, which is the mind, the brain, and then the heart, which is the place, the seat of the emotions, and then the kavod, which is the digestive system. So that's related with outwards expression. So when you have an alignment of moach, lev, kavod, that means that the person has perfect Yesod within them. Yesod is also, like we spoke, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, which is the lower triangle, is also seen as the expression how from yourself towards another person. So the perfect Yesod is not just when you have internal alignment, but when your alignment is also expressed to the person that's receiving whatever you're thinking, feeling, or expressing, that the person is the proper vessel to receive it. Let's say a person has a thought, a very brilliant thought, and tells a brilliant thought to a child, so then obviously it's not aligned Yesod. You're expressing from your thoughts straight to your words, and it's expressed, but the vessel is not ready to receive. The same thing also with an emotion. You have a certain emotion, and maybe you thought it out, and you think the emotion is proper. You're expressing the emotion. The person is not equipped, ready, or interested in receiving that emotion. Then it's misaligned Yesod. So the root of the sphere of Yesod is really the alignment, not only within themselves, a person within himself or herself, but also the expression that they're expressed. There's a full alignment between the giver, the expressor of the emotion, of the thought, of the word, and also the receiver, the recipient of that thought, word. And this is a perfect alignment of Yesod. This is called Ataras HaYesod, which is the Malchus of Yesod. When Malchus, which is the feminine aspect of the Sefirot, is the receiver, the crown of the Yesod, the Malchus of the Yesod is when the Yesod is experienced in the Malchus and the receiver in a proper way. Okay, this is what basically what the idea of Yesod is. Now, a lot of times people don't have perfect Midas HaYesod, and when it generally speaks in Kabbalah, and certainly in the Zohar, where it talks about a person that has misaligned Yesod, or negative attribute of Yesod, an imperfect balance of Yesod, it's generally talking about physical expressions of intimacy that is not allowed or shouldn't be done. That's generally what it talks about. But this is, we'll talk about it on a much more simple level, which will say that's the physical expression of Yesod. So the physical expression of Yesod is an unbalanced or unaligned expression. So let's say, very simply, let's say somebody does something. And this happens. Let's say you do something and it's unintentional, it's not premeditated. And you didn't really have intention to do it, and you did it, and it's harmful, it's hurtful to the other person. And then you regret it. You say, I shouldn't have done this thing. Anything that a person does, you do a physical action, and then 5 minutes later, or probably even a minute later, let's say a simple thing, let's say there was food in front of you, you're ready, finished eating, and you eat the extra food. Okay, let's assume that's the thing. You eat it and then you feel sick. So what happens is you actually did not have experienced in action perfect Yesod, because if the process would have been, do I need this, right? If you would have thought it through, and it would have gone from here to here to here until expression, then you probably would not eat the food. The problem is that you eat the food, and it's unfocused eating, or you find yourself eating and you don't have intention of eating. This is one of the reasons why we say a bracha before we eat. One of the intentions of a bracha, or blessing, that we do before eating is so we should focus just for one moment, pause, before you do anything, pause for one moment and say, do I really need it? Do I want it? And if I do it, I should acknowledge that it's a holy thing and it's for a purpose. Theoretically, every physical action we should do, we should make a bracha before. In the morning, when we say the bracha is the blessing, so you make a blessing of tying your shoes, you make a blessing of putting on your jacket, or your coat, your shirt, whatever you're doing, everything really should have a blessing. The blessing is the moment of pause, of wondering whether this action is aligned with who I am at this moment. Do I need this? So this is the expression of action. So we'll call this unfocused activity, or unmeditated, or non-conscious physical action. Unfocused and not aligned. Everyone struggles with actions that they regret. If you ever regretted anything in your life, that's proof that what you did, you didn't think through properly. Okay, now we're not talking about something that you thought about that you've done many years ago. We're talking about something that you've done immediately, and right after you've done it, you said, I shouldn't have done it. If that happens, that means really that if you would have thought through that process first, you wouldn't have done it. This is the world of action. The same thing also is true with the world of speech. That how many times in a conversation that you're speaking to somebody, you say something, and then you said, I'm sorry, I said that, I didn't really mean to say it, and I should have not said it, etc. Where does that come from? That's also an unaligned midas Yesod, because the attribute of Yesod is not focused. If you would have thought before you spoke, before you opened your mouth, then you would have said the right thing to the right person at the right time. Now, this is called unfocused speech. So all the openings, which is the expressions of the person, internally, it's the mind and the heart and the liver, the moach lev kavod. Externally, it's the orifices of the body, which generally is considered the mouth, which is the opening of the upper part of the body and the opening of the lower part of the body. That's the expression of action and the expression of speech. And these are aligned. That's why it's in the middle. It's in the middle of the body. The reason why it's in the center part of the body, because that's the Yesod, is these expressions. These have to be aligned. It has to come from here to here to here, and it should all be one. So if we go very deeply and say, okay, so what is the root of why people do things and then they immediately regret doing it? And then deeper, why do people say things and then immediately regret saying it? What's the root of that? The deeper cause of that, and why is there this scatterness in our actions and in our words, the root of that is because we don't have aligned thoughts. Because most of the thoughts that we have, we don't choose. And even thoughts that occur to us, we just entertain them. So we give a classic example. You're walking down the street, and you hear a noise, so you think a siren, so you think about a fire, and then you see a billboard, and you think about that image, and then you see something else, and you think about the other thing, and the mind wanders and jumps from one thing to the next thing to the other thing, and there's very little amount of control over your thoughts. Now, of course, on a subconscious level, it's very hard to control your thoughts, which is possible, but it's much harder. But we're not even talking about your subconscious thoughts, things that come up. We're talking about once they come up. Once a thought does come up, for whatever reason, if it comes up, do you just completely get lost in that thought? And you just completely wander into that thought, and then 5 minutes later you're saying, I don't know what I'm doing in an island in Aruba, and here I'm walking down the street? Or do you catch yourself and say, okay, let me think about the thought, where's it actually coming from, and let me try to get back my attention to the thought that I'm having. So because there's an unalignment, a lack of focus on the level of thoughts, which is the moach, therefore there's a lack of focus on the level of speech, and therefore there's a lack of focus on the level of action. So instead of doing a tikkun, rectifying, just from the level of action, saying, okay, I'm going to think about every action that I do, meditate before I do it. And every time I speak, before I speak, I'm going to make sure that I think about what I want to say. The best solution, if you really want to undo this pattern, is to actually learn to have some level of control of your thoughts. If you're going to learn to have some level of control of your thoughts, which means even though you're walking down the street and a thought just arises, it burps up and it arises and you're not even sure where it comes from, instead of entertaining the thought and allowing yourself to wonder with that thought, take control of yourself and say, this is a thought that I would not like to have. Now we're going to talk about that because that, on a deep level, the thoughts that you have unintentionally is also coming from within you, and these are thoughts that need to be recognized and need to be realized that there are probably reasons why you're thinking such thoughts is because of something deeply rooted within you that's allowing for these thoughts to happen. But we're just talking about a level of control. We're trying to gain some mastery of the midas Yesod, the attribute of Yesod, which means that when we do things, we never regret them, period. We should never regret anything that we ever done. We should never regret words that we ever speak. And more difficult, we should never regret thoughts that we have. Right? Actions is the easiest thing to control. Words are less easy, and thoughts are the hardest. So how do we gain some hegemony and some control over our thoughts? What's the process of getting control over your thoughts? Which on one level is not just only control, but to quiet the mind. To quiet the mind from the unrush of thoughts. That if you say, okay, for the next 10 minutes, I want to think through this issue. For the next 10 minutes, I want to daven, I want to study, I want to meditate, I want to do something constructive, I want my mind to be clear, and it can be for some mundane reason. For the next 5 minutes, I have to think about business, whatever I want to do. How do I make sure that when I think about something, I don't have unwanted thoughts that 5 minutes later I'm wondering why I'm having these thoughts and I'm not being clear? How do I have some control over my thought process? Okay, how do I have control over my conscious thought process? What is is there a technique to gain some control? And midas Yesod we talked about, and we say that in the composition where, in the structure of the human being, the Yesod is the back. And the reason why it represents the back, because it represents ideas that come to us unknowingly. It's like the subconscious thoughts that come up. Now we take control of our thoughts. If we take control of our thoughts, we can take control of our words, we can take control of our actions. So we're going to try to do a tikkun not from the lower up. Okay, action is very simple. So you meditate, you think about it, and you ponder this issue of why I do these things that I don't. And then you're going to say, okay, from now on, before I do an action, I'm going to wait one moment. And then you do this with speech. But we're going to go to the cause of it. What is the meta cause of why we have these unfocused words and unfocused actions? To go to the root of it, which is thoughts. So there's a practice, there's a Kabbalistic, Hasidic practice that's called Hashkata. Hashkata means to quiet the mind, to quiet the self, and to reach a place of inner self-control. The objective of this practice is to choose a particular thought to think about and allow yourself to think about it longer for a more extended period of time than 30 seconds. Let's say for 5 minutes, think about one thought. How do we gain control to think about one thought? And you think it's not so hard, but I guarantee you that if you try to think about one thought for 30 seconds, it's going to be hard. So how do we gain even 5 minutes to learn to focus on one particular thing? So the practice is like this. The concept is ashkata. Ashkata means that we're going to quiet, from the word sheket, we're going to quiet the mind. The roots of this idea is already found in the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about the early pious ones, Chasidim Rishonim, that before they would pray, hayishayim sha'achas lifnei atfilah, they would settle their minds. Right? So the Rambam writes, they would quiet their minds before they pray, and then they would enter into a prayer state. So instead of going to prayer and having all these types of thoughts, you first pause for a few moments, and that's how you enter prayer. Which incidentally, that's actually the proper way to daven even today. Halachically, you're not supposed to walk in to shul and right away start davening. You actually have to sit down for a moment and settle yourself and then start davening. That's why we say, for example, in the mincha prayer, which we say Ashrei and Shmon Esrei. Really, Ashrei just means Ashrei Yoshev Yisecha. The praise is the one that sits, which is the idea that you're sitting, and then you get off the Amidah, but you just don't walk in to start the Amidah. You can't just enter. You can't enter into something if you're not prepared. So the idea of the preparation is to settle the mind, to quiet the mind. How do we quiet the mind? This is done through Habata. Habata means observation. Okay, and this is the way this practice is done. What you do is you choose a particular thought that you want to deal with. An idea that you're dealing with, let's say an emotional issue, intellectual, whatever the issue is that you're dealing with in your life, something that you really want to think about and you want to take it to its depth. And you really want to think about it without any distracting thoughts. So this is the thought that I want to have. This is the thought that I want to think about. That's one set of thought. Then you take something else, which is you take a very short, a word or a phrase that's very familiar to you, that you can repeat over and over again to yourself. So it's an audible phrase. Let's say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Let's say, for example, I'm not saying you should do that, or this something very simple. It doesn't have to be actually in Hebrew or any other language. It's just ideas to focus. You take a very small phrase, and so your objective is to get to the thought that you want. Okay, that's the way you're going to get to. But in order to get to that place, what you're going to practice is you're going to practice Habata, which is observation. Observation means you're going to close your eyes. That's preferably. You're going to close your eyes and you're going to observe the thoughts that come up. The Habata means just to basically observe the thoughts. What you're not going to do is try to push away this thought. Let's say you close your eyes and all of a sudden you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, or what you had for lunch, or who you met, or who you want to meet. So don't push that thought away, because you don't want to push thoughts away, because the more you're fighting with your thoughts, the more you resist it, the more it persists. Besides, if you're going to fight with your thoughts, you're actually doing the opposite of what Ashkata means, is to settle your mind. So then you're busy fighting. Okay, so you don't want to do that. What you want to do is you just want to observe it and let it drop. So you observe the thought, and obviously I don't think you can actually observe it, but you enter into that thought. But simultaneously, what you're doing is you're constantly repeating to yourself quietly that little phrase that you chose, and you're repeating it over and over again, and that becomes your focal point. So you're focusing on the small little word or phrase. You're saying it over and over again to yourself quietly, but with sound and quietly. This is what you're trying to meditate on. This is what you're trying to keep your focus on. Thoughts will come up. That's inevitable. The question is not where you're going to empty yourself of all thoughts. It's not going to happen yet. Thoughts will come up. The question is what you're going to do with this thought. So you're going to observe the thought, you're going to watch it, and then go back to that focal point. And then you observe the next thought that comes up, you observe it, you let it go, and you go back to the focal point. Slowly, if you do this for a few moments, or let's say 5 minutes, slowly the thoughts start coming up more slowly. They're not coming up as randomly and as so continuously. So you're able to focus your attention on that one particular phrase that you're chanting over and over again, that you're repeating it to yourself over and over again. And this is your focal point, and it's with sound, and you're focusing on this. After a period of time where you sense that your mind is somewhat settled, and we're not talking about clearing your mind, and your mind is not completely settled and empty and nothing, or ayin. We're talking about there's still thoughts, but it's much more quiet and it's settled. The sheket, the silence of your thoughts, some level of silence. Then you introduce the second stage of the practice, which is that you introduce the thought that you would like to think about. And then start thinking about that thought. Now, of course, what's going to happen, inevitably, is thoughts are going to again come up. You're going to have to repeat that phrase over and over again, quiet the mind, go back to the thought, continuously thinking about it. After doing this for a few moments, the thoughts become more quieter, and you can focus your attention more on that particular thought. In this practice, you'll notice that a lot of strange thoughts are going to come up, things that you didn't think that that should come up. You think that you're a sane individual and you don't have such thoughts. That's okay. Don't try to push it, don't try to fight it, and don't try to judge it. It's not the time now to think about, how could I have such thoughts? And really, I'm a good person, and why should I have such terrible thoughts? Forget about the judgment of these thoughts. That's not the intention. The intention is not to observe what those thoughts are. There's other practices where you're actually observing them, and this is one of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, that you observe what those thoughts are to find out who you are. And these thoughts tell you about yourself, but this is not what we're trying to do now. We're trying to disquiet ourselves. So just observe it without any judgment and without any strife, without any struggle. You observe it, you repeat over and over again that continuous phrase, and then you introduce the longer thought that you would like to think about in order to quiet the mind. What this does, this is just one practice. What the idea is that eventually you become comfortable and you gain some hegemony, some type of control over the thoughts that you wish to have on a conscious level. So if you say, okay, for the next 5 minutes I want to meditate, I want to think, I want to pray, I want to do this particular action, and this particular thought process, I want to think it through, your mind will automatically settle. And if it doesn't, you can do this practice. You choose a phrase, you repeat it over again, it's quiet, and then you choose the thing. Slowly you learn how to take some level of control of your thoughts. When we reach a level of a tikkun on the level of thoughts, that we have control of our thoughts, that we don't find ourselves wandering and just mindlessly roaming places, but we have control. Whenever a thought comes, we have control whether we want to have this thought or not. Now, of course, again, this is very difficult to say that you can do this always, but if you get some level of control, then you'll start being, when there's going to be a tikkun for Yesod, or alignment and the level of thoughts, then there'll be a better alignment and level of words, then there'll be a better alignment and level of expressions, and then there'll be alignment not only in terms of yourself, but in terms of the receiver. And that's really, the tikkun Yesod brings about chen. Chen is grace, or certain quality in a person. When you say somebody has chen, someone has, I can't translate this in English, but that's not the right word, but it's chen. There's no other way to translate it. It's when you see someone and they're not torn or in all different parts, different pieces. For example, a very simple example, a little kid has a lot of chen. Little kids have chen. Why do little kids have chen? Because little kids are complete alignment. Because they have a thought, they have a feeling, and they express it exactly what they want. If they want to eat, and they're 2 months old, they cry as if the whole world is being destroyed. Because this is what they need, and this is what they have. So this is alignment. As we get older, some people lose this sense of alignment because they understand one thing, they feel another thing, and they do something completely different. And that's why the person is all like a bad Picasso picture, all mixed up. And the idea of chen is really to regain that focus. And that's the opposite. Noach matzah chen, Noach has chen, Noach has perfect midas Yesod, the perfect attribute of Yesod, and that's why if you look in the story of the Mabul, it's the opposite of aligned Yesod. What's the opposite of aligned Yesod? And this is what it talks about in the generation of the flood, is when there's interspecies relationships, which is the opposite of Yesod. There's the giver and the receiver is not desirable, or it's not the proper. The perfect Yesod is when the giver and the receiver are all in sync, both in terms of on an intellectual level, on an emotional level, and a physical expressive level. So chen is something that's in oneself, that there's alignment between your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and also in terms of how it's expressed to the person that's receiving it. That's the Ataras Yesod, that's the feminine, that's the Malchus of the Yesod, when there's unity of perfect Yesod. And this is, as we're working in the Sfiros, we're talking about reaching Shavuos, and this is the final, next week is the final week before Shavuos. So now we're working on Yesod, which is the alignment on this level, that it should be in alignment. And then we work next week on the Malchus, which is the receiver. So when we work on the Yesod, we're talking about that we should have focus, not only actions and words, but also thoughts. Okay, so